This is a totally equal position, but over the next couple of moves, white takes over the middle game and ultimately ends up in a winning endgame. But what's interesting is that black didn't make any blunders. Black didn't make any major mistakes. There were just some subtle things about the position that white was able to capitalize on that led them to the winning endgame. So this is going to be a very instructive game. We're going to see exactly what happened that led up to this point and how white ultimately took advantage of those small little things to get to the winning position. Welcome to episode 17 in a series where we're going through this book, Logical Chess, Move by Move. This is a special episode for two reasons. Number one, my brand new course, Breaking 1500, is open for just today only. It closes at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time today, which is Friday if you're watching this video the first day that it comes out. So if you are interested in that, today's the last day. Once you enroll in the course, you have lifetime access. You can take as long as you need, but the doors are going to be closing. Okay. The second reason why this episode is so important is because we're starting a new section of the book called the Queen's Pawn Opening. Now, for those of you who have been following the series, you know that the previous episodes focused on kingside attacks. Okay, we saw lots of different games where the players castled kingside and there was some sort of attack on the king. This section we transition, okay? Queen pawn openings, generally speaking, are more positional in nature, right? And I think that's what we're going to see. Actually, the first game already kind of illustrates that. There's other weaknesses besides the king that you can take advantage of, right? And that's what we're going to see in these games, okay? So this is going to be very instructive from a positional standpoint, and I'm excited about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So d4, d5, c4. This is the queen's gambit. It's not a true gambit in the sense that even if black takes your pawn, you can always get it back whenever you want, really, with e3 or e4, letting the bishop out. And as an example, if black ever tries to hold on to this, they get into big trouble. For example, this is a pretty common queen's gambit trap where queen to f3 actually just wins a piece. Okay, one of these pieces has to fall. The rook is undefended. You can't block, or you just gets captured. There's just nothing for black to do. Okay, they've overextended their pawns and created these weaknesses. Right. So that's an example of why it's really not good for black to try to hold on to the pawn, and so you can always take it back. So it's not a gambit where you're actually risking losing a pawn. Okay. And he talks about in the book how one of the primary features of the queen's gambit is the C file. Okay, this C file is incredibly important for both sides. We're going to see that in this game. And C4 immediately creates the tension that is most likely is going to lead to that C file being open, right? Imagine if we trade here at some point, then it's open. Or if black takes us, it's also going to be a half open C file. So you're going to see more about that as we go through the game. So black decides to play the queen's gambit declined. They don't accept, they just play e6. Now, if they did decide to defend this with the knight, this is not an ideal move because now we could simply take the pawn, and however they recapture, we're going to be able to win a tempo, right? We could play e4 in this situation, get a big center, chase the knight away. They have to waste some time moving. Or if they take with the queen, we could play knight to c3, again, chase the queen away, then play e4, get a nice big center, and we're just gaining tempos on these black pieces. Okay, so queen's gambit declined, very solid option. You just defend the pawn. You can also play the Slav with c6, but this is totally fine as well. All right, let's keep going. So knight to c3 makes a lot of sense, developing a piece and attacking the center at the same time. And black does the same thing, controlling these same squares, right? So white plays bishop g5, and it's a pin. And it also puts pressure on these squares. And actually, if black is kind of not paying attention and just plays a move like a6, there is a little bit of a threat here. If you would like to pause, what is the threat that white has? Well, the answer is you can simply take the knight now. And if they take with the queen, they're just going to lose a pawn, right? Because the queen no longer defends the d pawn, so you simply take it. So black probably doesn't want to do that. But if they take this way, well, now you can also trade. And look at the pawn structure. Double isolated pawns. An isolated pawn. This is very bad news. And if you try to castle over here, your king's just wide open. So it's a really rough situation for black to be in already. Okay, and we talk about not wanting to trade a bishop for a knight without a reason. But this is a good reason, right? You're either going to win a pawn, that's a legitimate reason, or you're going to totally mess up the pawn structure and the king side, right? That's worth giving up the bishop for the knight, okay? So let's go back to the position here. Black deals with that by playing the move bishop to e7. They break the pin on the knight, and also now, if we were to take, they would simply recapture with the bishop, leaving the queen here defending the pawn. We're not able to win a pawn, and this is a situation where I would not trade my bishop for the knight because I'm not getting anything in return. I'm just giving up the bishop for the knight. So do you see the difference there? That's important, okay? All right, so bishop to e7. Let me check my notes here, see if I wrote anything down that I wanted to mention. All right, let's keep going. So knight to f3, very good developing move, just getting the knight out, also controlling the center. This e5 square a lot of times is important in these queen-pawn openings because it's usually a place that the knight can just jump into and exert a lot of pressure on black's position. Okay, so keep an eye out for that move. And here we go. Oh, actually, yeah, this is... So I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but Harry Nelson Pillsbury is the person playing this as white. Very, very strong player. Unfortunately, they died young. I think they died at like 33, so they didn't really get a chance to fight for the world championship, but I think they probably could have been a world championship contender. Anyway, very, very good player, but there's a theme called the Pillsbury attack, which was named after Pillsbury, and essentially what it was is you would jump your knight in to e5, follow that up maybe with like f4 to just really support it, and that was called the Pillsbury attack. So I'm wondering if we'll see more of that as we go through the book. I'm not super familiar with that, but just keep an eye on this knight e5 idea, okay? All right, so black decides to play the move b6, and it looks like a pretty natural move. You're just trying to develop the bishop over here. This is kind of a common thing. If your bishop is stuck, one thing that you can do is fianchetto it over to the side. Now, you have to be a little bit careful because you create some weaknesses along the light squares when you play a move like b6. But if you can get your bishop behind it immediately, the bishop fills in those squares nicely and you end up with a pretty solid position. Okay, so that's what black is trying to do here. Now, he mentions in the book that one of the primary things that black needs to do in these queen pawn openings is at some point strike the center with c5 or e5. Those are important because they put pressure on white's center and they free up black's position so that the pieces can move around and have more options. Okay, so just keep an eye out for those moves as we go through the game. So white plays e3, letting out the final piece, and black plays bishop b7, kind of completing the development there. Rook to c1. So remember, we talked about the importance of the c file, and you can see now immediately white is bringing the rook over. Now, I think a lot of people would want to develop the bishop first. And there's something really interesting here that you should understand. So this capture, black has not played it yet. But in the Queen's Gambit, that's a move that black a lot of times will play at some point, even if they don't play it right away. They could play the Queen's Gambit immediately, but they also could wait. And the nice thing you can see is going to unleash the bishop here, really give that bishop nice scope. So this is probably a move that black wants to play. So we could play bishop d3 right now. But then if black takes, well, we have to waste a move recapturing. We spent 2 moves with that bishop when we really could have just done it in 1. So what white is trying to do here, or at least one thing, is they're delaying moving that bishop just a little bit to give black the opportunity to take. And that's exactly what we see in the game, actually. So that's what one thing that's going on here. White plays rook to c1. And yeah, I believe, yeah, right here, black, yeah, they do take the pawn. So white didn't have to waste time, right? You see that. So I think if black was smart, or if what I would have done if I'm playing as black is just wait. Maybe I'll castle. Maybe I'll play knight b to d7. There's other moves that black could play, and only after white develops the bishop, because they don't want to leave that bishop sit there forever. They're going to have to develop it at some point. For example, let's say knight b to d7, then they go bishop d3 because they need to get the bishop out. Now would be when I would take that with black, and I make white waste the move. Okay, so just a little subtle thing there, but they didn't do it in this game. So bishop takes c4. Now they play knight b to d7. And let me see if I'm want to mention anything else. Oh yes, very important moment here. Okay, so knight b to d7 is there. A lot of people think, okay, c6 and f6 are the best squares for the knight. f3 and c3 are the best squares for the knight. And you're right; those are fantastic squares for the knight. But there's one super critical, important point here, that the c pawn needs to be able to go forward. I already mentioned it, to attack the center, right? If you play knight c6, you can't move your c pawn. And that is a strategic kind of mistake in these queen pawn openings. You'll notice white, the knight on c3 is not blocking the c pawn because it was moved forward right away when they played the queen's gambit, right? So white's fine. But black needs to make sure they leave that move as an option for themselves. So that is why in a lot of cases you will see the knight go to d7 instead of c6. Okay? Very, very important that black does not block that pawn. All right? So here white decides to castle, get the king out of the center, and black does the same thing. Okay, and queen to e2. So a lot of times queen to e2 or queen to c2 are great places for the queen. It connects the rooks, which gives you options to bring this guy over. And also what they've done is create a battery. And against a fianchettoed bishop, this is a pretty good idea to keep in the back of your mind. You can create a battery, you can invade, sometimes trade off that bishop. That can be useful. We'll actually see that as an example later in the game. Okay, so queen to e2. And black plays the move knight to d5. Now, this was the equal position. Okay, I'm looking at Stockfish here on the side. It's totally equal. Right now, white has no real significant advantage. But over the next couple of moves, without making any big mistakes, black sort of gets into trouble. Okay, now, knight to d5 is actually not a bad move, and it makes a lot of sense. When your position is cramped, and black's position is a little bit cramped, the queen doesn't have very many places to go to. Notice white has a lot more space to maneuver and do whatever they want. So when you're cramped, trading pieces is a good strategy. So what black is doing here is totally fine, offering some trades, right? Totally fine, nothing wrong with that, okay? So white decides to trade, but they do it in a very interesting way. Now, the first thing that I want you to understand is what happens if black tries to get fancy, and instead of taking here, they decide to take here. So I want you to imagine you're playing this game, and your opponent takes here. Pause and think through for a second, what move should you play? All right, well, if you had a chance to think through that, you want to remind yourself, we just took a piece, we lost a piece, so at this moment in time, everything is equal. So start with the most obvious moves and work from there. If I take the queen, what happens? Well, they're going to take my queen with check, but then I'm going to get a piece. So at this point, I'm up a piece, which means black has to take my bishop back, otherwise they're going to be down a piece, right? They take it. And what can I do? The follow-up move, rook takes c7, puts white in a very nice position. Okay, so it was very simple. Just follow through with the trade, and at the end of it, you have the rook takes the pawn. But it's good to think through that, right? Because I think some people might, you could scare yourself here and start thinking like, well, maybe I should do something else. Let me take this. And then you lose your advantage, right? You lose the pressure on the c file, and now it's just a totally equal position, okay? All right, that's not what happened in the game. In the game, black simply captured with the queen. And white does make another trade and forces black to recapture here. Now, the reason they force them to recapture with the pawn is because if you take with the bishop, notice the rook, again, is hitting that c pawn. Okay, we're seeing the importance of this c file. And they can simply trade and then invade, and they're just in a winning position, okay? So because of that, it forces black to take here. Now, why is white happy about this? Why do you think white is happy about this? Well, the main reason is the bishop now. Look at the bishop. It's stuck just hitting the pawn. You lose the effectiveness of that. And so that's one reason. Also, white is planning to start putting pressure here. And we're going to see that as we go through these next couple of moves. Okay, so bishop to b5. And black plays the move queen to d6. Now, remember earlier in the game, I said black needed to try to play c5. The author points out that at this moment in the game, black has already lost their opportunity. Okay, they've already lost their opportunity to play c5, and basically, watch what happens. So if they play c5 right now, what can white play? This is a good moment to think through this. Well, the answer is you just simply take the knight, right? Because if you look, there's there's 3 defenders. There's only 2 attackers. However, if you trade, you eliminate 1. And then when they take back, you eliminate another one to where now there's only 1 defender, and you simply take here and you win a pawn. Okay, so that is why black cannot play c5 at the moment, and because of that, they have to somehow deal with the threat here, and so they play the move queen to d6. Okay, and yeah, we'll talk more about c5 in just a second. All right, rook to c2, and he talks about how doubling rooks on an open file more than doubles the strength of the rooks. Now, when I read that, I was like, is that really true? I don't know if I would say that. But the point he's trying to make is when you double up your rooks, it's very powerful and it's very dangerous for your opponent. Okay, and so this is a very easy thing to do if you have an open file, or in this case, a half open file. This is a great strategy, right? Just double up the rooks, and then you have all sorts of threats that your opponent has to deal with. Okay, let's keep going. So black plays c6. Trying to add a defender to the pawn and chase the bishop away. So what do you play if you're white in this position? Well, white decides to simply go back to d3. And if you were tempted to say bishop a6, this is not a bad idea. We talked about it earlier. Creating the battery, trying to get rid of the bishop, which is defending the pawn. I think the issue here, let me see if he mentions it. No, he doesn't mention it in the book, but I think the issue here is that after the trade, Black's just going to put probably this rook here, and I guess they're just somehow defending. They're holding on. So we're going to actually compare this position to what happens in the game. You're going to see the difference. So in the game, they play bishop to d3. Black plays knight to f6. And this is a critical moment. Okay, so we need to talk about this moment because this is a very logical looking move. Black's like, well, the knight's not doing much. Let me move it over here. Maybe I'm going to jump in. Like, why not? Right? I think a lot of people would play this move and not really think twice about it. He talks at this moment, about how all moves must be made with respect to the threats of the opponent, not to arbitrary judgments which declare that certain moves are always good or always bad. He says all moves must be measured by their worth in the particular position being played. So basically what he's saying is, yes, normally knight f6 is a totally fine move. Like, sure, we'll bring your knight over there, maybe put it in e4, whatever, that's fine. But in this position, there's something else going on and you should be reacting to it. That's what he's saying. But Black is not doing that. So let me ask you guys, what else is going on in the position that Black should be reacting to? Well, the answer is the c-file. Okay, we already know what White is trying to do. They're trying to double up the rooks and really put the pressure here. And if they are able to finish what they're doing and prevent you from playing that c5 move that we talked about, Black's in trouble. So this is kind of a golden opportunity. They've chased the bishop back. They have the knight sitting there supporting it. Now it's kind of the moment when Black should say, hey, look, I need to play c5. I need to get this move in while I can before the rooks come over and who knows what else is going to happen. Because now, like, this is good for Black. They have these two pawns. They're threatening to push forward. It's a very dynamic position. It could go either way, White or Black, but Black's position is fine. And they've accomplished one of the key goals, playing c5 and creating that counterplay, right? By playing knight f6, they're basically like asleep to what's going on in the position. And they don't understand that, like, no, you just missed it. You missed your opportunity. Now you're not going to get another chance. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Why knight f6? Even though it's not a bad move, Stockfish doesn't complain about it. But from a strategic standpoint, it's really a mistake. Okay, so what does White play? Of course, rook after c1. That's pretty obvious, doubling up the rooks there. So Black tries to play the rook over to defend. Okay, just adding a defender. And what move do you play now? All right, well, the move is bishop to a6. Now, when you first look at these bishops, okay, I think it's pretty obvious to see that, like, this is not a great bishop. Doesn't have a lot of scope. Can't go there. I mean, it could go in the corner, but that doesn't seem very good. This bishop seems pretty good, right? Let me look at this. We're controlling all of these squares. We're controlling this nice diagonal over here. So intuitively, do we really want to trade this bishop for this bishop? Well, I think a lot of us would say no. So why is it that in this game, Pillsbury plays bishop to a6? It's because, going back to what I just said, you don't want to always just think, oh, it's never good to trade a strong bishop for a bad bishop. Never do that. Well, does the position require that you should do that? And in this position, the answer is yes. Why? Because this bishop, even though it's a bad bishop, is the only thing that's holding Black's position together from the threats of these rooks. Okay, if that bishop is gone, then all of a sudden, White's threat on c6 becomes so much more powerful. Okay, so that is why we make the decision of, like, yes, our bishop looks nice sitting here. But do we have any real threats? Not exactly. We can't really do anything over there. The knight's defending. I mean, what are we going to do? Move it here, but that doesn't do anything. So we make an exception, okay? I hope that makes sense. Very, very important that you understand this. That's why I'm really kind of elaborating on this a lot. So bishop to a6, and Black basically has to take, otherwise we're going to trade into them. Queen comes in, and now we have pressure that is very hard for Black to handle, okay? All right, so they play the move rook to c7. Defending here. Temporarily, this is defended enough. However, we have more troops coming with knight to e5. Remember, we talked about it earlier, knight to e5, a nice little move, and it comes at a very good time because it puts the pressure on c6. Okay. Black now decides, you know what? I'm going to do it. I should have done it earlier, but better late than never. They play c5. Okay. What is the problem with that move for black? This is a good moment to pause and think through this position carefully. All right, well, the answer is there's a tactic. There's a tactic, and this has not been a very tactical game. All right, there have been a couple of moments where a few little things popped up. For the most part, it's a strategic positional battle. But at this moment, a tactic pops up, and this is really, really critical because a lot of players, they either think about tactics and they don't really care about strategic stuff, or they think about the strategic sort of long-term plan and they forget about tactics. But you need to do both if you want to be a really good player, okay? So as this game is going, you're thinking about the strategic things. All right, let me pile up the rooks here. Okay, let me trade this bishop because that's going to help me. All right, let me jump my knight and let me do all this stuff. Wait a second. As soon as the tactic pops up, you have to catch it. You have to realize it. So what's the tactic? Rook takes c5. And you're taking advantage of the pin here. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say a lot of people watching this video probably missed that move. Okay? And it's because if you're not constantly reminding yourself, wait, I need to just be on the lookout. There could be tactics. You'll miss it. You'll get caught up in the strategic plan and whatever's going on and you just miss it, right? So, I'll always be kind of scanning for pieces that are undefended, and that's a big clue, right? The queen's undefended, and so that's a big clue. I talk about this in my course where we go through the blunder section and some of the things, but one of them is looking at the queens like this, and if you were doing that, I think you would notice this. Now, why don't we take with the pawn? Because it leaves our knight undefended, so we can't do that. But we can take with the rook because this pawn is essentially useless, right? So really, it's just a rook, a queen, a pawn. This guy doesn't really matter, right? So yeah, rook takes e5. And now white is really in the driver's seat. So black decides to trade. Again, the rook comes in. And now black plays knight to d7, trying to mitigate the damage here and offer a trade. All right, if you want to pause, here's a nice moment to find a pretty good move. What should white play? All right, well, white decides that, if I trade and the queen captures, yes, I'm up a pawn. I can, let's say just go here. Yes, this is probably winning for white, but it's not that easy, right? Black's going to try to just kind of hold on, and I don't exactly see how white is going to break through immediately. It's not that simple. And also, you kind of have to either deal with that, or if you move your rook away, like let's just say back here, well, then you're going to lose the pawn. Okay, and that doesn't seem very good for white. So what they do instead is a little in-between move, rook to c6. Attacks the queen, but then gives themselves time to move the knight away, okay? And so when you're in a nice position and your opponent is just trying to trade off and simplify into like an endgame that they think maybe they can draw or something, you want to really look for some nice moves that prevent them from doing what they're trying to do, and that's what we see here. Okay, rook to c6. Black plays knight to b8, trying to get fancy, and if you would like to pause, what should white do here? Well, the answer is you have to take the queen because it is a fork. And so if you just move your queen away, you're just going to lose the rook. That's obviously no good. And so you do have to trade at this point. But this is a much better version for white, right? Because now the knight's on the rim, not a great place. Your rook is very active, threatening the d-pawn. And this is great. Okay, white is doing very, very well. All right, let's keep going. Because the game starts to really get interesting over the next couple of moves. Even though it looks like white's about to just finish it off, let's just keep paying attention. So rook takes e6, and he says something here very interesting, I thought. He says, sorry, no, it's coming next. Next move here. Actually, no, sorry guys, I'm all over the place here. Pause. What do you think white should play in this position? All right, the move is knight to c6. Now, why would you play this move instead of taking the pawn? This is the million-dollar question. Why would you play this move instead of taking this pawn? What do you guys think the answer is? Well, the answer is when you have a winning or a close to winning position, you don't want to give your opponent a chance to create a counterattack. Because if they can create a counterattack, you never know what might happen, right? The counterattack might turn out to be stronger than you realized. You might all of a sudden have to start defending, and it totally changes the course of the game. So if you simply take this pawn, it allows black to play rook to c8. Now, rook to c8 is a very annoying move because, for one, they're threatening checkmate. You have to deal with checkmate. Let's say you do something like g3. Knight to b4. Look at this. It's a fork. You say, oh, that's fine. I'll just come in and evade. But watch this. They play f6, chase your knight away. You move it somewhere. And then they're going to invade with knight to d3, and now they're threatening to either come down here or maybe come in here with the rook. Basically what happened was all of a sudden their pieces are active. They're threatening stuff, and it gets very tricky as to what exactly you should do and how do you stop this guy. Because if this guy gets in here and he starts munching up your pawns and taking here and putting you in check, and who knows what else is going to happen, that's not really what you want, right? So going back to this position, how does white prevent that? Knight to c6 is a killer move because you can't go there because of this fork, right? See that? Also, it's attacking this pawn. And also, guess what? You're still threatening this to take it later. So it's just a crushing move, but very, very important that you understand why. Okay, so let's keep going. So knight c6, super nice move there from white. Black plays g6. They don't want to deal with any back rank mate problems. They want to give the king an escape square, so g6 is played. And here, white decides, all right, let me go ahead and munch on the pawn. Notice it's also keeping an eye on the only open file on the board. Okay, this is the only open file on the board. Open files are critically important for rooks at the end of the game. So going back to earlier, why you didn't just take that and allow black to get the open file, well, white is still keeping an eye on that even as they take this pawn, right? Very, very important, okay? And so, like, again, let me just imagine if you take this pawn, you have, well, actually here you're fine. Never mind, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, sorry. You take the pawn, black plays rook a8. Sorry, this is a super long game, so I'm like trying to remember everything that I wanted to say, but I'm getting some of this stuff out of order. So back to c6. King to g7. Okay, this is critical because that threat of the fork no longer exists, right? The king now has stepped out of that. So just keep that in mind, okay? So white plays the move a3. Again, this is another one of those moves where it's like, okay, you don't want to give your opponent any counterplay when you don't have to, especially in these positional types of games. That's how you take a winning game and you lose it, right? When you give them an opportunity to counterattack, okay? So for example, if you take this pawn, do you guys see how black is going to counterattack? Yeah, rook c8. Rook c8 again, right? There's no fork now because the king has moved, like I said. You can't move your knight or you lose the game. Checkmate. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to defend it then. But then knight to b4 happens, and look at this. Now what do? Right? There's a fork. Yes, you can play d5, and I think you're barely holding on according to Stockfish, but knight takes d5, and if you do this, now black has some really good chances of maybe drawing the game. They've got control of this file. They can invade. This is not what you want, okay? And so that's why white says, no, I don't need to rush and take that pawn. Let me just play a3. Let me just take away the square from the knight, shut down any ideas of the rook coming in here, right? Just a very simple move, okay? All right, let me see. Where are we at? So a3 is played, rook to c8. And I kind of already talked about it, but what is black's threat by going here? Well, the answer is knight to b8 is the threat, right? Because knight to b8 attacks your knight, and you can't move the knight because of checkmate, okay? Back rank mate, super important, okay? Super important. So what does white do to deal with that? Well, g4, they push a pawn. Now, he mentioned something here which is important. I think most people understand this, but let's just make sure that you do. At the opening and the middle game, during the opening and the middle game, you do not want to move pawns in front of your king like this. Creates weaknesses, puts your king in danger. However, are we in the opening or the middle game? No, we're at the end of the game. So at the end of the game, this is actually a good thing because now your king is not going to get back rank checkmated. You have an escape square, escape route, and it's totally fine. You don't have to worry about the weaknesses that you created, okay? So just keep that in mind. It depends on which phase of the game you're in. As a general rule, when queens are traded and there's not a lot of pieces left, that's the end game, okay? All right, so black plays knight to c7, finally trying to hold on to that pawn, which white has not taken because of all the reasons we talked about. And he just simply forks these pieces, and he's going to take it anyway, right? You just can't really stop him. So knight to e7. Black plays rook to b8. And again, we see white with a very high-level move, okay? I'm going to say 90% of people playing this game are going to take the pawn. That's just what you're going to do. You're going to take this, and you're going to be happy with this endgame. Yes, you have 1, 2, 3 extra pawns. Is it a win for white? Sure. Is it an easy win for white? Well, I don't know how easy it is because this king is going to come over and stop your pawns, and the rook's going to try to be annoying, and you still have to figure out how to win, but it's probably a win. However, In the game, he says, you know what? Instead of taking that right away, I'm going to be a little bit annoying and play rook to d7. I'm going to attack this guy. I'm going to line up over here, and I'm still threatening to take it. I'm just sort of doing more, putting my rook in an even better square. They really wanted the rook to be here, felt like it was more powerful, so they kind of throw in this in-between move. Okay, let's keep going. Knight goes to e6, and finally, take the pawn. Okay, black plays rook to c8, gets control of the file, and now it's a different story. I mean, now it's not checkmate, right? And after white plays knight to b6, you actually got all the pawns. So notice, it's almost like the same stuff is happening, but it's happening in a different way where white is so much more happy with the position, right? So do you see how all those subtle little decisions led to a much better version of what would have happened earlier, with except black would have had a bunch of extra pawns, right? Okay. Rook to c2. Generally speaking, if you can get the rook on the 7th rank or the 2nd rank, that's a pretty good thing, right? That's why white wanted to position the rook there. Notice there's usually lots of targets, and black is doing the same thing, right? There's targets, and that's a great place for the rook. Okay? Now, we're getting to a really interesting moment in the game. So if you think it's getting boring, trust me, it's not getting boring. We're just about to get to the really interesting part. So white plays b4, right? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Your pawn's under attack, so you move it. And it's also a pass pawn, so you push it forward and you're going to try to get a queen. I mean, it makes total sense. So at this point in the game, black tries to do something really interesting. They play the move knight to g5. Now, knights and rooks are actually interesting pieces because they can work together in a very nice way sometimes to really put pressure on a king. And that is what black is trying to set up, okay? Now, I have a question for you guys. Think carefully before you answer. I want you to answer the question. Is f4 a move that white should play, or is f4 a move that white should not play right now? That's the question. All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, I think f4 is a very natural looking move that a lot of people would play. And the answer is you should not play it. And let's talk about why. It unleashes the rook in a way that was not possible before. The f pawn was kind of shielding the rook from this part of the board. As soon as you play f4, look at the rooks, total access to the king, okay? And black has an amazing thing that they can do here. Knight to f3 check, which actually draws the game. Draws the game. Look at this. White has 1, 2, 3, 4 extra pawns, connected pawns, passed pawns. The king is not in a position to stop him. You're going to push these guys down the board. You're going to get queens. And yet, the position is a draw. How? Well, we're in check. That's one thing. We have to move our king. If we go here, the game is over. We actually get checkmated. Beautiful checkmate pattern here. Okay, so keep that one in the back of your mind. So we can't do that. We have to go king f1. But now, black has a way to draw the game. Now, this is kind of like an endgame puzzle or something if you want to look at it that way. What's the move here for black to draw the game? You got a chance to look at that. The move is rook to d2. And what you're doing is positioning the rook to keep the king from escaping. Okay, now, let me explain what I mean. But let's just say white plays a4. You're going to take here with check. The king has to move, but you can't move up because the rook. So where do you go? You have to go to one of the sides. So if you go here, I put you in check. You don't want to go in the corner and get checkmated. We already looked at that, so you have to go back. And I put you in check. And if you go here, now when I play check, notice my rook is defended. But also, it's stopping the king from escaping. If the rook was sitting over here, my king could run, right? That's why rook d2 was needed. And now you have this amazing perpetual check. There's no way for the king to escape this little pattern, right? You just do that 3 times, so you get the same position 3 times, the game is a draw. It's amazing, right? But it goes to show when you are ahead, you need to be very careful that you limit the counterplay of your opponent. That's the theme that we're seeing over and over from this game, right? Limiting the counterplay from your opponent. And that's what f4 allows. Sorry, I did too many times there. That's what f4 allows. It allows that to happen. Okay? So what does white do instead? They ignore it. Just play a4. Because now if you jump in with knight f3 check, I just go king g2. The rook is not involved. Yes, you can throw in a check with your knight if you want. Let's just say like here. Now I'm just going to come up. Yes, you can play g5, but I'll do something like this. Attack your pawn, maybe come over here and get control of the file, and I'm fine. Okay. Now you do have to be a little careful that you don't like let the rook and the knight do. Actually, I don't even know if you have to be careful because the king can always hide on h3. So I don't really think there's any risk in this position. Anyway, the fact that the rook is not involved because the f pawn is why it's different. All right. So back to the game. a4. So black plays knight e4, and they're trying to be sneaky. They're trying to eliminate that pawn, which is kind of acting as a shield. All right. So what does white do? What do you think? What would you play if you're playing this position as white? Well, I sincerely hope that you didn't say f3. Because if you said f3, guess what? It's a draw. Black just says, thank you very much. They go back to g5, and guess what? They're going to do the same thing that we just looked at. And what's amazing is you have no way to stop it. Your pieces are just not positioned to stop it. The knight's too far. You can try to come back to help, but it's too late. Knight takes f3 check. Guess what? You don't want to go there. We already looked at it. And if you go here, guess what? You know the move, right? Rook to d2. And the same thing is happening. Check, 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 check. You have no way to stop it. It's incredible. It's actually incredible. So again, you have to be really careful. What is the counterplay and how do you prevent it? So what does white do in the game? a5. They just ignore it. They just ignore it. Because when the piece captures, it's not in the correct position to do what we already talked about. That's why. Okay? So black actually does take it. And what does white play? a6. They just ignored it 3 moves in a row. They're going to get a queen. Now, you might be wondering, well, wait a second. Actually, in this position, black resigned, although they could have tried one thing, which is super interesting. Again, knight to h3 check. What move do you play here? You only have 2 options. Which one would you play? Well, I really hope that you didn't say king h1. Because guess what? King h1 allows knight to g5. And if you try to run here, they jump in on f3 and it's a draw. Now, some of you are thinking, well, I won't go there, right? I'll get a queen. That's what I'll do, right? a7. Now black wins the game. Knight to f3. This is checkmate, my friends. It's checkmate, and you can't stop it. The only thing you can do is sacrifice your rook to delay the game. They take you. You can get a queen. Doesn't matter. Ooh! Ouch! Wow! Can you just imagine for a second? Can we just all appreciate this? Let's just imagine you're playing the game, you play so well, you're finding all these nice moves, and then you get checkmated like this after you get the queen. I mean, that would just be heartbreaking, right? Heartbreaking. So, going back to the situation here, the move was king f1. Okay, you needed to escape. You need to get out of the corner. If you play king f1. Well, now black doesn't have time, right? Because if they try to do the same thing now, knight to g5 to come in here, a7, knight to f3, it's too late because now you do get the queen. And notice the rook is not on d2 like it needs to be, right? You need to play rook d2, but now the queen is going to help out and you win, okay? It was that close, though. It was that close to just throwing a winning game. This is why it's so critical that you limit your opponent's counterplay. If you remember nothing else from this video, remember, limit their counterplay and make sure that you're paying attention to their tricks. This was kind of a weird game, right? Because the way to limit the counterplay from this knight was to actually ignore it. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. Like, just ignore it. You just push your pawn. It's a fascinating game. Fascinating game. So, that's it. Pillsbury wins. I hope you guys enjoyed that. This was a really, really interesting game for me, and I enjoyed going through it. Next time, it's game 18. Starts on page 111 for those of you who have the book and are going through it with us. As a final reminder, my course, Breaking 1500, closes tonight, 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, and I'm going to stop mentioning it. I promise this will be the last time you hear about it. So if you want to get in, we're having a great time in there. So many people are even already commenting, and well, I say already, I'm recording this video ahead of Friday, but it's a Tuesday, and even already people are saying that it's been helpful. Like the first couple of modules, they're learning a lot, and so lots of really great feedback. So anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.